This episode of the Recipe for SEO Success podcast is sponsored by Ahrefs, tools to grow your search traffic, research your competitors, and monitor your niche. Head to ahrefs.com to learn more. Crawlability is super important for your website, ensuring humans and those sticky little Google bots can slip through your site like a damp otter down a pipe. Well, it's crucial. We don't want duplicate content. We don't want oodles of pointless pages and archives being crawled. We want slick, efficient, uber crawlable websites. And today we're going to be telling you how to make that doable. Hello, my name's Kate Toon and I'm the head chef here at the Recipe for SEO Success, an online teaching hub for all things related to search engine optimization. And I love SEO, sometimes, not all the time. And today I'm talking with David Pagotto. How are you doing, David?
I'm doing very well. What about you, Kate?
I don't know. I'm doing okay. It's been a tough week. School holidays here, so never fun. But let me introduce you to the world of the Recipe for SEO Success anyway. So David Pagotto is the founder and managing director of SixGun, a digital marketing agency based in Melbourne in Australia. He's been involved in the digital marketing space for over 10 years, helping organizations get more customers, more reach, and more impact. SixGun focuses on scaling organizational growth and building sustainable results for the long term with a data-driven approach to developing strategy. That all sounds very exciting. What's it like in Melbourne today? Because I'll be in Melbourne next week for CopyCon. What's the weather like?
Very exciting. Look, it's a bit of a mixed bag. You know, it's just clouds forming. It's a bit grey outside. For
those of you who don't live in Australia, the joke about Melbourne is you have 4 seasons in a day. Is that right? 5 seasons? 4?
Yeah, that happens. Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a lovely city. You should visit if you're ever there. Anyway, let's get stuck into crawlability. We're going to start off with defining crawlability. So, David, give us your definition of what crawlability actually means.
So look, crawlability is all about serving valuable content to the search engine crawlers and ensuring that valuable content is crawled as efficiently as possible. And it's also equally about removing and blocking what you don't want them to crawl.
Yeah. So basically, for those who are really at the beginning of their SEO journey, every search engine has 3 elements to it. It has a crawler or a bot or a spider, whatever you want to call it. It has an algorithm, which kind of sorts that data out and decides what it's going to do with it. And then it has a search engine results page. So we're mostly talking about Google today, but obviously things like YouTube are also search engine, Facebook, Instagram, they're all search engines because they have those things and they all crawl through content. But we're focusing today on website crawlability and Google, really, because it has the biggest market share here in Australia and in the world. So for your average website owner, your small business, your e-commerce site owner, why does crawlability matter so much?
Look, ultimately, crawlability is all about getting that edge. You know, that additional edge to give you that additional ranking performance boost. And crawlability and crawl efficiency really cover an umbrella of technical tasks that we'll probably dive into throughout this podcast. And it really reminds me of, I hope some of the viewers have seen the movie The Aviator, or else this isn't going to make the most amount of sense. But in the movie The Aviator, Leonardo DiCaprio plays Howard Hughes. And in one of the scenes, they're trying to break the speed record in the H-1 Racer aircraft. And, it shows Leonardo DiCaprio or Howard Hughes talking to his tech team and telling them to shave down the rivets on the plane to make it as slippery as possible. And it's such a the way he says it, it just always reminds me about this stuff. Shave down the rivets, make it slippery. Some of this stuff with crawl efficiency, it is the 1%ers. We're not fighting over the, necessarily, some of the bigger elements that make up search engine performance. Sometimes we are when we get to content and things like that, but often it's about the 1%ers. And, if you want that edge, crawl efficiency is something you need to consider.
Yeah, I like to call it the pointy end of SEO. When you've done all the obvious things, you get to the point where you are literally just trying to find tiny things. You are shaving down rivets. But then equally, I think a lot of sites have major crawlability issues, but they're just not aware of them. the classic one that I see so often with WordPress site owners is where they've accidentally checked the discourage Google on search engines from crawling this site, and their site's been live for 2 years, or they've got a block in their robots.txt that the developer has left there for a couple of years. So those, I think it's not just the pointy end, and I think today we're going to go through the 99%ers and the 1%ers. So keep listening. If you're thinking, well, I don't have crawlability issues, I bet you probably do. Now, another phrase that's bandied around a lot is crawl budget. This idea that these bots get worn out after looking at a certain number of pages. Can you take us through what crawl budget means?
Yeah, so essentially, based on the size of a site and the authority of a site, it's basically allocated a certain amount of crawl budget. So a website like theage.com.au or Sydney Morning Herald have massive crawl budgets. Massive. The amount of pages that would be crawled every day would be astronomically high. Whereas if you're, Barry the Plumber, for example, small WordPress site, 15 to 20 pages, your crawl budget's going to be a lot less, and rightly so.
Right. So it's all about poor Barry and his tiny crawl budget. We're going to talk about Barry quite a lot in this podcast. Get ready. In fact, David and I have got a bit of a thing for Barry. So let's talk about some of the key elements of crawlability. Some of these you'll have heard of, some of them you won't, dear listeners. So the first one that you might have heard of is a robots.txt file. And that's one of the files that tells Google what it can and can't look at through a series of allow and disallow statements. Most of the content management systems that exist, like Shopify and Squarespace, will just generate this for you. You don't have to really do anything. And with WordPress, you can install Yoast, and Yoast will create a standard robots.txt file. And often you don't really have to fiddle with it. It just uses the default. And then the other part of that is the sitemap.xml, which is a kind of ever-growing list of all the pages, posts, and products, and maybe other things on your site. And again, most of the content management systems out there generate this for you, or you can use something like Yoast to create it if you're on WordPress. But David, what are some of the common problems you see in people's robots and TXT files and their sitemap.xml files?
So I think, probably the biggest things are to make sure that, you're not blocking the entire website in a robots text file. That's quite common. Exactly as you described, a developer builds a new website, it goes live, and then, a year or two later when they're like, we don't get any traffic organically. What's going on? They reach out to an SEO agency, and it's pretty clear that, they've done a disallow all inside the robots text file. So making sure that the robots text file isn't blocking things that you want to make sure aren't blocked is pretty critical. Making sure that the sections of the site that are being blocked that you want to block. For example, if you have sections of the website that house, on the server, you might have like a folder for all of your assets. You might have like PDFs, you might have doc files, you might have HTML pages, whatever that may be, making sure that kind of thing is blocked. Like you said, most of the content management systems handle it really well naturally, and you don't have to go in there and make changes. But sometimes you might want to go in there and block things like parameters, block things like tags and categories, depending on if content's being duplicated and things like that as well.
I'm just going to expand on that one a little bit, because I think just make sure people understand. So in like, for example, Yoast, you can go in to the taxonomy section of Yoast and say, look, I don't really want Google crawling through my author archive or my tag archive, because every time you pop a tag into WordPress, it's going to generate a little archive of all the blog posts that have been tagged with that tag. And those pages could be competing with your really good pages, your product pages and your service pages. Like, for example, if I've got a tag copywriter and I've tagged lots of posts with that, and I've got an archive set up, I could also have my product page, which is kind of selling me as a copywriter. And those two pages could be competing with each other. So often SEO types and web developers will say, disable your tag archive, your author archive, sometimes your project category archive, even your blog category archive, sometimes kind of dependent on your site. And that's very easy to do with Yoast. So that's a good thing. What about no indexing and no following individual pages? Can you take us through that a little bit?
So the best way to think about it is that you've got a robots.txt file that sits at the top of the pyramid, and that controls what the search engine crawlers have the ability to actually crawl. So if you disallow something there, they won't bother even crawling it. Now, you can also, in the meta robots, set up tags like no index and no follow, which say, the page will be crawled, but if it's no index, it won't be added to Google's search index. So it crawls the page, but it doesn't put it into its index. And the no follow attribute basically sets out that the default links on that page automatically apply the no follow attribute.
So what would be the benefit of having a page which is crawled but not indexed?
Well, generally speaking, we would prefer to have it not crawled at all, because the problem with, using, and in most instances, it's absolutely fine, particularly on a small site. But the problem with having pages that are crawled, but then set to no index, is that you're wasting, crawl budget and efficiency in terms of getting them to crawl a page that you're telling them not to index. So it's kind of a little bit counterintuitive.
Yeah, it doesn't really make much sense.
Doesn't really make much sense.
And another thing a lot of people stress about is, password protected content and content that's behind a login or a membership. And, again, it should be said that most of that content, you wouldn't necessarily want it to be crawled or indexed, possibly if it's completely private content. You don't really want to give that away. Sometimes you might have it indexed, but then when they click through, there's some kind of password protection. So usually on most of the membership plugins that you get with WordPress and with other content management systems, this is all handled for you. As soon as you put something behind a login or a password protection, it's going to be fine. It's not going to be, it could be crawled, it could even be indexed, but no one's going to be able to see the content. Is that right? Does that sound right?
Yeah. That's right. I mean, it depends on the setup of how you do the password protection, and depends why you want to protect it. But it's very easy to get that content crawled and indexed, and it's also easy to block it depending on why it's there to begin with. So
yeah, exactly. It depends on how you want to do it. So, for example, the content within the Recipe for SEO Success it's not indexed or crawled, and the content for like my SEO Nibbles course is crawled and is indexed, but you have to log in to see it, because I kind of want people to know what's in there, but I don't want them to be able to see it until they've logged in. So it kind of depends what your business rules are, really. Yeah. So we've got a couple of questions from members of my Digital MasterChefs mentoring group. And the first one's from Nadine Crow. And this is something commonly asked about large kind of e-commerce sites. Would you instruct Google not to crawl certain sections of a very large site to preserve crawl budget?
So I think ultimately, if there's value in the content, then it should be available to crawl. There's no reason why you should be blocking sections of a site that is valuable in order to prioritize other sections of the site. It doesn't matter how big your site is, the crawl budget will allow for it to be crawled over time, unless it gets stuck in some kind of infinite loop, which sometimes happens. But generally speaking, if the content is valuable, you should have it available to crawl. It might not be every day, it might not be crawled every week, depending on the authority, but it will be crawled, it will be indexed, and if it's valuable, it will be ranked.
So I have seen, I think there was a recent talk at Brighton SEO where someone talked about how for a large e-com site, they did, kind of cut off certain sections of the site to promote other sections of the site. It was kind of tactical. It was they tried different things over a couple of months. You wouldn't recommend that?
Well, it depends on what sections of the site as well. So, if there's valuable content, it should be available. But if the content is duplicate, if it's thin, if it's a page that shouldn't really be there, if it's consolidating products where people have, color variations of separate products back to one, there's all sorts of reasons why you would no index or block content. But I would say that if the content is valuable, it should be crawlable and it should be indexable.
As you'll have heard at the start of the episode, the wonderful folk at Ahrefs are now sponsoring the Recipe for SEO Success. Ahrefs is an all-in-one tool that helps DIY SEOs and SEO experts do a whole range of wonderful things, including competitive analysis, keyword research, technical audits, backlinks, and more. I lost a good few hours today going through my backlink profile, checking out all the new lost and broken links, finding out my new referring domains. There's a whole range of stuff there, fascinating, and the layout is so easy to use and understand. That's what I'm loving about this Ahrefs tool. It's just easier. The design of the tool just makes it easier to digest the information. So if you want to check it out, they do have a trial at the moment. You get 7 days for just $7. So head to ahrefs.com and check it out.
So I guess that brings us on to the next kind of thing, which is like talking about the reasons why you would, stop content being crawled. And as you've mentioned a couple there, so duplicate content pages, which often happens on an e-commerce site where they've got like 17 variations just for color rather than having a drop down. And also sites where, maybe there's lots of thin content from back in the day, and also zombie pages. I love your zombie. Tell us what a zombie page is. I love that expression.
So, a zombie page can be defined as a page that's it's on the site, but it has ultimately no value or very little value. So good examples of this kind of stuff would be, pages that are automatically generated from, the demo theme that you installed. And then there's, a whole bunch of these lorem ipsum pages.
Yeah. Hello world.
People that leave the hello world up. Like you would be surprised how many people we get come to us that still have that live.
Oh my God. I have so many people on the course and I'm like, have you actually written a blog post called Hello World? I'm just going to suggest it's not a great title.
It's not great. That's right. Things like when you install sliders into, or like pop-up plugins, for example, into WordPress, sometimes it'll create a bunch of elements that have their own pages.
Yeah.
And then, zombie pages can also cover pages where you've got content from, perhaps really thin content, super unvaluable. It was put up, 10 years ago. It kind of covers pages that really, like when you think about pages that have little to no value.
Yes. So we'll call them zombie. They are the Walking Dead of pages, and they need.
That's right. And then there's all sorts of ways that they manage to creep their way into the website, often totally unknown to the owner.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's one of the first things we do on my big SEO course is we get the students to crawl their site and have a look at all the pages, and we use a couple of different methods to do that. The first is the classic site:/domain.com.au, which you just type into Google, and that will give you that. I love that one because it scares people, and they go, "Why have I got 6,000 pages indexed?" And it's like, now because I've only got 10 pages on my site. So that's a really good one for quickly identifying issues. And then both of our favorite tool is obviously Screaming Frog, which is free up to about 500 pages. And you might think, well, I haven't got 500 pages. But then when you see all the random things that are being crawled, you might eat up that Screaming Frog budget quite quickly. And, this is a really important thing for anybody to do, is to crawl your site and see what content is being crawled. And Screaming Frog's great. It's going to show you your URLs, your title tags, your meta descriptions, your alt tags, your H1s. It's going to show you all your response codes, so all your 404s, your 301 redirects, your 200s. Awesome. And I think that often shows up a lot of horror, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's where you find all your zombies, and you have to start deciding whether to kill them. So let's talk about some different types of kind of crawling issues that come up and often pop up when you run a Screaming Frog or the site content search. The first one, which is for many people a throwback to a little bug in Yoast about 6 or 8 months ago, I think, is finding that all your media attachments have been crawled. So for listeners, you might not know, but by default, often what happens is websites will create a page for every media file that you upload into your site. And, you don't really want that. You don't want a page which is just your image on the page. It doesn't make sense out of context. So how do you deal with media attachments being crawled? What's your solution to that?
Generally, the best way to handle that is to block it in the robust text file, or, with Yoast, for example, you can set it to no index as a part of the options in there as well, which is an acceptable way to handle it, on a smaller scale.
Yeah, perfect. I'm sorry, I was just taking a big sip of water there and expecting you to talk for longer, but you didn't. There was a bit gurgling in the background. I do apologize. Yeah, so I think for anybody who went through that Yoast issue, it's been resolved now. A lot of people use the Yoast Purge plugin, which kind of purged those media attachments from the index. If you're still seeing some show up, then I think it's, again, just check your settings in Yoast. And sometimes you do just have to wait for things to fade away. I'm not sure I would be going through in 301 redirecting lots of random media attachments. Would you?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, that's right. I would just, set everything to no index or block it. And it won't take long for, Google's crawlers and the other search engine crawlers to work their magic.
Now, another thing that often comes up in Screaming Frog is lots of random CSS and JavaScript files that are being kind of crawled, because obviously things like WordPress, every bleeding plugin adds another CSS and another JavaScript. How do you handle those? Do you just let them be crawled, or again, do you say?
I think generally we just leave them in place. And it isn't a problem if there's, a small number of these, like an expectedly small number.
Yeah.
But sometimes, if you do a crawl and there is a massive number of JavaScript files, CSS files, all sorts of things, there's definitely a consolidation piece that needs to happen.
Yeah.
But for the most part, having a few bits and pieces pop up there in Screaming Frog isn't going to cause any problems.
And I think that's a really important thing to touch on, because I think lots of people will go into Search Console and they'll see lots of 404 errors and broken links, or they'll get some random little things coming up in Screaming Frog. And it's like some of these things are acceptable. It's okay to have some 404 errors. You don't need perfect site hygiene. And so I think some people get obsessive about it and, redirect every single 404 error. And it's like there are probably better, if you've got limited time, if you're DIYing your SEO, there's probably better things you'd be spending your time doing that will have a bigger impact on, your ranking and conversion and traffic and all that kind of thing. So don't get obsessed. Don't fall down the rabbit hole. So let's talk about a few other things. A big issue, obviously, for most people that's going to have the biggest impact on crawlability is duplicate content. Now, sometimes this happens without people knowing, and sometimes it's almost like deliberate. The example we use a lot is the kind of the e-commerce store with all the iterations, but there are other instances of it as well. So what are your thoughts on duplicate content? Because most people often say, set a rel canonical on the one that you want Google to love, and then just leave it like that. But you don't think that's the best solution, do you?
Well, look, it's far better. I mean, just from a crawl perspective, to have a single page that houses the content versus 10 where 9 have a canonical tag pointing back to the master.
Yes.
You can do that. And, there is a level of, okay, from a duplicate content point of view, you're not going to get pinged by Google. You're not going to get any problems. But from a crawlability point of view, you're wasting a lot of efficiency. You're creating a lot of drag. Those rivets certainly aren't shaved down. So
you and your rivets. No, I agree. And I also think, more importantly than all of this, from a usability point of view, it's effing annoying to have a page where to look at another color swatch, I have to reload the page, because no matter, even if you've shaved your rivets down and your site is loading under 3 seconds on a mobile phone, that's still frustrating to wait for that. So I think there's usability issues as well. But let's, another classic duplicate content issue. I'm coming back to Barry the plumber, and his plumbing Petersham, plumbing Newtown, plumbing Stanmore, plumbing whatever. And he copied his page, he's changed one word, and he's got loads of them in his footer. And the bloody annoying thing is that they work. They're ranking. When you Google it, he is ranking. And yet Google continuously tells us this is not what we should be doing. It's not good for the user. It's not good for anybody. But Barry's getting away with it. Why, David? Why?
So, look, the truth is, like you said, they still, those kind of pages still really work. And there's a lot of, when you look at the information that comes out of Google, often I like to equate it to asking a police officer for information about what's illegal and not legal. And often, the answer you get is so black and white, that's definitely illegal. And Google have taken the stance that these pages are definitely illegal, definitely frowned upon, and we definitely don't want them, and they're definitely bad. And in a lot of instances, they certainly are. Like in terms of where people just use the same content and change change the location and duplicate it out 1,000 times. And, we have clients come to us where they've done that previously, and we have to start cleaning things up, and it turns, it can be very messy. So, on one side of it, you've got the fact that, this kind of thing, I would say the duplicate, if you approach it with the attitude of, duplicating out a massive number of pages and being duplicate content and providing no user value whatsoever, that is setting yourself up for failure big time, even if you're getting some initial bursts of performance in the short term. So from the other side of it, when we look at Barry, it's possible for Barry to, be servicing, nearly every day 3 or 4 different suburbs around him, where he's got, awesome, unique content. There's testimonials from clients in those areas. The content speaks to his work that he does within the areas, and perhaps the variation of types of work and why it's there. You can do like, when I've seen this done really well, they've done videos that talk about that specific area. There's a way to do it well, right? And there's a way to do it terribly. And when it's done, when Barry the plumber does, 3 location pages for areas that he services, and the content's awesome, and it's like, there's videos and there's client testimonials from those areas, and there's like some really specific content, and it actually adds values to users going there, and they know that Barry is in that area, that he services it, that people are happy in that area. I mean, there's a way to do it well, and then there's the way where you've got, someone that's trying to generate leads and on-sell them, so they've created 5,000 pages where the only change is, the suburb, and every other piece of content in there is duplicate. It's like there's a massive difference on the spectrum of like doing that well with the right intention, with the right philosophy, and just taking it to a level that obviously, Google hates. And you will see the repercussions for that at some stage, if not already.
Yeah, I agree. And I think as well, once again, as you said, adding testimonials and adding like directions and your favorite coffee shop nearby and where you can park and bus details, all of that stuff is actually useful, because these pages, although often they do rank, when you click through to them and start reading them from a human perspective, as you said, they're horrible. Yeah. So they're not going to help you convert. So you've great, well done. It's almost vanity ranking. You've got to position 1, but is that page actually generating any inquiries or conversions? Probably not, because it is a combination of the two. So yeah, okay. So we'll leave Barry alone a little bit. Let's talk about some common questions we often get in the I Love SEO community on Facebook. So obviously, one of the ways that we can deal with, pages that are no longer there, or pages that lead to 404 errors, is to set up 301 redirects. So this page has gone Google, or we've created a new piece of content over here, follow this 301 redirect, and that happens. That's awesome. But the question people ask is, how long do you have to leave those 301 redirects up, like for the rest of time, or will Google eventually cotton on and you can delete them?
Look, generally, as a part of, if you have a plugin, for example, inside WordPress that handles the redirects, and you add that redirect into that kind of a plugin, generally it's something that lasts indefinitely.
Yeah.
And 301 is meant to be a permanent redirect. And you have to be mindful that, if you're going to redirect one thing to another thing, it has to make sense for it to be redirected. Like sometimes a 404 is the right answer. Like if you're discontinuing something that you're not going to be, there's no relevant pages that tie to that on the website for whatever reason. It's acceptable to have a 404. Like it's not, 404 saying, look, we no longer really do this, but you can have an interesting 404 page. You can give users search functionality. You can do some fun, quirky stuff that you often see these days, which is really cool. But to answer the question of how long, I mean, a 301 redirect should be ultimately set up with the idea of it being permanent.
Yeah. So again, some good points there. I think we talked earlier in the podcast that, having a few 404s is not the end of the world. In Google Search Console, John Mueller has said that they are in order of priority, so you can work from top to bottom and then just mark as fixed. But yeah, I think even if you are totally anal about this kind of thing, someone somewhere is going to see a 404 error page. So make it sexy. From a copywriting perspective, I always find it a really fun area to kind of give a little brand experience and just continue that tone of voice and do something playful. Often as well, I think some people, especially with e-com stores, they'll redirect a discontinued product to another product, and then that product will discontinue, and they'll redirect it to another product, and that can lead to these redirect chains, which again really mess with your crawl efficiency. So if you're listening to this, and people often ask this question, if you have a product that is never, ever coming back into stock, then I think it's a good idea to redirect to the product category and let people just see the wealth of what you have.
Yeah.
If it's gonna be coming back at some point, leave the page there with an out of stock message and have some kind of data collection that says, hey, this is coming back, pop your email in here and we'll notify you when it comes back. It's a really powerful way of actually driving more sales.
So one thing to add to this is there's a bit of a difference between an internal 301 and an external 301 in terms of how we view it. So when you run a Screaming Frog crawl, for example, what you're seeing there is 301s that exist on the website itself. And those 301s should be swapped over to direct links where possible. That's how those should be handled. Whereas, it's okay to have the 301 in place in the background, for example, a page that's no longer internally linked to. So from an old product page to a new product page of the new variation of that product, you'll set up a 301 redirect there, but you don't want to see any internal 301s on the website itself.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, let's talk about a few final bits and bobs before we wrap up this episode on crawlability. Again, other types of redirects. If we're redirecting from HTTP to HTTPS, which is more often done in a core file rather than as 301, like in your htaccess file or something like that. Yeah. Again, another one that we leave forever, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you shouldn't have, in this day and age, everything we know about, HTTPS, everyone should be on HTTPS with an SSL certificate. So, if you have a WordPress install and it's installed on the HTTPS version, all of the other versions, the HTTP, the www, non-www, however, whatever variant there is, should 301 redirect via a wildcard to the HTTPS version, and it should be done forever.
Fabulous. And I guess the other one, and we've talked about this before, but people get very antsy with me about domain redirects. So maybe they've changed their domain and, they've moved to a new one and they set up redirects, and then it comes around again. They're like, well, do I need to keep the domain for another year? And like you said, it's like $9 or something. And they're like, yeah, but, can't I just let it expire? And then, and your approach is just pay the $9, right?
That's right. Keep the domain, make sure it's redirected. I mean, we see this problem all the time when, a client has a migration strategy across to a new website or a new brand name and all this kind of stuff. And we have seen some absolute disasters where people have let domains lapse with so much authority, and, there should have been a proper migration strategy in terms of redirects and things like that weren't done. Once you lose that domain and it goes into someone else's hands, it's very difficult to kind of try to get it back. So for the cost of the domain, for the brand value, for everything that you've built previously with that domain, you just keep it.
Yeah. And again, coming back to those internal links, often internal links, are set as absolute links rather than relative. So you've got the full URL in there and you've forgotten to change it. And you've got links within your own site pointing to that old domain that's now someone else owns. And
yeah.
I'm not using myself as an example. I never did this. This did not happen to me. It happened to me. So, even the people who are supposed to know what they're doing sometimes forget that couple of different internal links that they didn't change because they're an idiot. And yes, keep the domain, people. Don't let it expire. So we've talked a lot about WordPress, and obviously sites like WordPress make all this kind of stuff quite easy because you've got plugins like Yoast, you've got 301 redirect plugins. You can get in there and fiddle with the robots.txt and the sitemap and kind of make changes. But then we have other platforms like Shopify, which don't let us fiddle. So, is there much we can do about improving our crawlability on sites like Shopify?
Yeah, I mean, I'd focus all on the, that tactical side of things in sites like that. Largely things like the robots text file and sitemap and all that kind of stuff that Shopify would handle natively is done quite well, and you don't need to really worry about that. But things like, duplicate content and things like the zombie pages we talked about, and things like even just like, compressing images before they go up on the site, and all of the like tactical stuff can still be executed on a site that's built in Shopify, for example. So I'd focus on the tactical side of things.
Yeah, I mean, focus on what you can fix, basically, because you can't fix what you can't fix. So that's fantastic, David. I feel like I know a whole lot more about crawlability, and I hope the listeners do too. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Kate, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Fabulous. So as you know, if you have any questions about crawlability, feel free to head to the I Love SEO group on Facebook. And at this time, I usually give a shout out to one of my lovely listeners. So this is from T Damji. And she says, I've not only been learning a lot of new things about SEO, but I've had success with implementing the things I've learned. Well, there's nothing better than that. So thank you for that review, and thanks to you for listening. If you like the show, please don't forget to leave a 5-star rating and review on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you heard the show. I'm running out of ones to read out. So if you've been listening for a while and have never got around to it, I would be very grateful if you would pop in and leave one, hopefully a positive one. That would be really nice. It helps people find out more about the lovely world of SEO. Gosh, I'm babbling, and makes me happy. And also don't forget to check out the show notes for this episode at www.therecipeforseosuccess.com, where you can learn more about David, check out his website and all some useful links about tools that we've mentioned in the show. And finally, don't forget to tune into my 2 other podcasts, the Hot Copy Podcast, a podcast for copywriters all about copywriting, and the Confessions of a Misfit Entrepreneur. Until next time, happy SEOing.